You're watching BBC World News. Stay with us now for a BBC News special.
Hello and welcome to Pretoria. I'm Karin Giannone. Welcome to this BBC News special on the day Oscar Pistorius was put behind bars for killing Reeva Steenkamp. 5 years for shooting his girlfriend through a locked toilet door, but he could be out in as little as 10 months. We'll be getting local reaction. It's the finale in the Blade Runner's Fall from Grace, but can he ever redeem himself in the public's eye? Well, here we are, 7.5 months on from the start of this trial, a trial that saw Oscar Pistorius in the dock accused of premeditated murder in the killing of Reeva Steenkamp. He was convicted of culpable homicide, and today he finally learnt his fate. He will spend a 5-year sentence behind bars, perhaps as little as 10 months of that actually in prison. Andrew Harding has this report on the day in court.
A final glimpse of Oscar Pistorius this morning, leaving the courthouse in an armoured police van, heading to the nearby prison. In court beforehand, he'd shown no emotion, watched by Reeva Steenkamp's family, as the judge rejected claims that prison would break the disabled athlete. Pistorius, she said, could expect no favours from her.
It would be a sad day for this country if an impression were to be created that there was one law for the poor and disadvantaged and another for the rich and famous. The sentence imposed is a maximum imprisonment of 5 years.
Pistorius seemed to be expecting it. He said goodbye to his uncle, handing him an expensive watch for safekeeping, and went down to the cells. It was last February that Reeva Steenkamp arrived at her new boyfriend's house, ready for Valentine's Day. Oscar Pistorius shot her dead that night, believing, as the judge now agrees, that she was an intruder. They'd been South Africa's most glamorous couple. And today, after the sentencing, I spoke briefly to Reeva's mother, June Steenkamp.
I'm satisfied with it.
You are?
Yes.
He could be out after just a year or so.
Doesn't matter, he's going to pay something.
Do you think justice has been served?
Yes.
Her husband, Barry, then hinted at the toll the long trial had taken on the family. So how about you?
I also feel justice has been served, and we're very relieved that it's all over here.
And goes 40 metres clear.
Pistorius was the first disabled athlete to compete alongside able-bodied rivals at the Olympic Games, a global icon and inspiration.
Bronze. It's gold again for Oscar Pistorius. And how...
Today, his family said they would not challenge his prison sentence.
The court has now handed down judgment and sentence, and we accept the judgment. Oscar will embrace this opportunity to pay back to society.
But as Pistorius's lawyers then explained, a 5-year sentence doesn't mean 5 years.
So basically he's going to serve 6 of his sentence, which will be about 10 months, and then afterwards he would be released on house arrest.
So this is where he is now, Pretoria's central prison. It's not considered a soft option, but Pistorius is almost certain to be kept away from most other inmates. By now, Pistorius will have been processed, searched, given a medical examination and his orange prison uniform. He's been promised a single cell in the hospital wing here, where it's very likely he'll spend his entire sentence. This was the last picture of him today, a fallen hero beginning a short sentence. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Pretoria.
Well, Professor Stefan Terblanche is a professor of law at the University of South Africa here in Pretoria. He's a sentencing expert. He was actually quoted several times during this trial, and Judge Masipa quoted something from his book in her sentencing judgment today. Stefan Terblanche, did she get it right?
She certainly, in her judgment, considered every factor and fact. Her judgment is subject to very little criticism in my view, and it's one of the better sentencing judgments I've heard. And based on that, one has to say that she justified her conclusion, and it's not for me to say whether she got it right. She had the discretion, it was her decision, she heard all the evidence in this case, and I think she did a good job of that.
When the availability is there of a sentence that could be up to 15 years for this particular offence of culpable homicide, why did we see a 5-year sentence being handed down with this option to be released under correctional supervision after a sixth of that sentence, i.e. 10 months?
Look, the whole problem with culpable homicide is that there's a very substantial range of blameworthiness that can be attributed to the offender, because the result of this crime is horrendous. Somebody died in every time. But with murder, that killing was intentional. With culpable homicide, it can range from little blameworthiness to a lot. So there's no real guidance to the courts on how much should be imposed. And there isn't really a limit of 15 years. The limit is actually life imprisonment. And courts tend to impose much lower terms of imprisonment for this crime because it's not accompanied with intent and therefore accompanied with much less blameworthiness. Judge Masipa compared a number of judgments, previous ones, and decided on this term of imprisonment. And it is a mitigated form of imprisonment which permits the earlier release of the offender and then on correctional supervision.
Tell me about this concept of correctional supervision and how it works in reality. How restricting would it be for someone like Oscar Pistorius? It's effectively house arrest, but what are the restrictions?
Yes, house arrest is the first restriction. There would also be a requirement of community service. He will be limited, he might be limited to certain magisterial districts. He will not be allowed to travel much. He could be, his drinking of alcohol and so on could be limited. He could be required to pay compensation to the Steenkamp family or anybody else for that matter. So there's a lot of conditions that could be attached to that. Because this release is in the discretion of the prison authorities, they will determine the conditions of the sentence or of the correctional supervision. And the house arrest can be more strict at the beginning and it can be relaxed as the time goes along. He should be allowed time to go to work if he has a work, to go to church, to go shopping once or twice a week. That is the standard for this kind of conditions, that there should be some leeway for this person to get out of the house.
And community service, would that be part of an arrangement?
It would normally be part of an arrangement. That's why the probation officer, or one of the probation officers in the case, testified about 16 hours per month of community service, which is the figure that one finds in the Correctional Services Act. Once again, this could be relaxed in the course of time, and he could be required to do less community service as time goes on. So it's really within the discretion of the Correctional Services authorities.
Professor Terblanche, just stay there for a moment if you will. There has been a lot of negative reaction as well, particularly from women's groups who feel that the sentence hasn't been enough. It doesn't send a strong enough example about the consequences of violence against women in a country that suffers a lot of violent episodes against women. I've been speaking to Professor Rachel Dukes, and she's from the Gender and Health Research Unit, and this is what she told me.
South Africa has an incredibly serious problem of severe violence against women. we have 3 women who are killed by their husband or boyfriend every day. And this case, as all other cases where intimate partners are put on trial for the killings, is supposed to be an opportunity where a message is sent out to society that this isn't on and this isn't an aspect of the society that we all want to live in. And I feel that that opportunity has been very, very tragically missed in this case. It's also the case that violence against women and children and severe violence leading to women's death is driven by overwhelming belief in South African society that men are superior to women and that essentially that they're more valuable than women. And I feel that this incredibly short sentence for the killing of Reeva Steenkamp is another example of the lives and the career and the future of a man being valued over that of a woman who he has killed.
That's Professor Rachel Dukes. And Stéphane Terblanche, I just wanted to ask you one aspect of this imprisonment and then presumably house arrest. Would Oscar Pistorius be able to, say, write a best-selling book and profit from what's happened?
There is a provision in the Correctional Services Act that actually prevents that from happening, that declares it an offence to publish a book about the crime, whether directly or indirectly, that resulted in the sentence, whether imprisonment or correctional supervision. So based on a fairly superficial reading of that provision, I would say no, he cannot write a book and profit from that. He could be sentenced for that and his profit could be taken away. Whether this is constitutional is another matter, but I have not seen this issue taken to court yet.
Professor Stéphane Terblanche, sentencing expert and legal professor at the University of South Africa, thank you very much. Now, we've become pretty used to seeing Oscar Pistorius over the course of these 7.5 months there in the dock, but remember what a shock it was when the news broke of his shooting dead of Reeva Steenkamp on Valentine's Day last year, and what an icon has fallen. Dan Rowan, our sports editor, has a look back at Oscar Pistorius' fall from grace.
Oscar Pistorius did more than win races. He changed the way the world viewed disability. But long before he became extraordinary, ordinary was all he wanted to be.
Well, they may call me the Blade Runner, but I'm just Oscar. When I was born with missing calf bones, my parents had faced the very difficult decision of getting my legs amputated. But today, I can look back and say that they definitely made the right decision.
Destined to be one of the great Paralympic athletes of all time.
Few know Pistorius as well as Olympian Torkmore Nyangani, his long-term training partner here in Pretoria.
I had a lot of incidents that he helped me. I can't count how many times he helped me. I can say Oscar is a gentleman. He's somebody who sticks to his words, who was chasing a dream, a big dream.
That dream began when at school Pistorius was given carbon fibre prosthetics and began to run.
It was here at the Pilgridge Stadium in Pretoria in March 2004 when a teenage Pistorius, after just 2 months of training with blades, showed just how good he was, running the 100 metres in just 11.51 seconds, a new world record.
Oscar Pistorius is flying away from all of them. 21.99, my goodness.
Paralympic golds followed in Athens and Beijing. By now, Pistorius had become a brand.
They told me that I'd never walk, and a man with no legs can't run. Anything else you want to tell me?
At London, he became the first amputee to run at the Olympics. But by now, stories were also emerging of another side to his character.
Anu Fari, who was a roommate with Oscar Pistorius, told me that he had to move out of their room because Oscar had gone hysterical on the phone, was shouting and screaming on the phone. In fact, I had the story confirmed by so many other athletes who said it was terrible to witness, this incredible meltdown.
Fari later said he'd left the room on medical advice before a big race, but there was a growing sense that fame and fortune had gone to his teammate's head. But the man who's become the new poster boy of Paralympic sport told me that Pistorius was also capable of surprising generosity.
You know, in the final in London, you know, he said just before, you know, do you mind if I pray for you? You know, and you know, he was a nice person to be there. But it's a crazy situation. But I think, you know, in terms of what he did for Paralympic sport, I think says in itself, you know, he made that first breakthrough.
Pistorius will now be defined by tragic events away from the track. One of sport's most dramatic falls from grace is complete.
Dan Rowan, our sports editor, reporting there. Well, South African sports journalist Jean-Jacques Cornish is with me. Jean-Jacques, you've been following Oscar Pistorius' career since he was very young indeed. Does this sentence today mark the absolute end of his competitive future?
I think the end of his future, sure. He was going to retire in 2017, so whatever happens with the custodial sentence and the correctional supervision that he gets after that, he will be too old to compete at the top level. So yes, it's an end to that. Whether it's going to be an end to the service he can provide to athletics, and particularly disabled athletics, well, that's another thing. Is he going to coach? Is he going to mentor the young athletes? He might do that as part of his community service. But Oscar Pistorius as the Blade Runner, yes, he's finished.
What does that do to South Africa? And I mean, the fact that this man was extraordinarily big and inspirational to the people in this country and so far beyond.
We're very big on team games. We're mad about sport, absolutely mad about sport. It's the soft underbelly of South Africa. But individual sportsmen, we have a dearth of them. And Oscar was one of those. And in every respect, he understood what he was doing. He understood how important he was to South African sport. The number of times I got calls on where he was performing, how proud we were. I think I must have done it every Saturday, every summer that he did perform. It was amazing, and it just heaped success upon success. He was an absolute hero. We have had heroes fallen before, and each time it's been bad, but this has been the very worst that I've experienced. It was absolutely gutting. I think I mentioned earlier that the day the shooting happened, Valentine's Day, is for South Africans like with Americans. Where were you when Kennedy was shot? You would know what you were doing on the day you heard when Oscar had shot Reeves Steenkamp. So it's something that will stay with us for a long time. And it's interesting that South Africans responded so viscerally. They were furious about it, felt terribly let down. And by the time Oscar came to court, just weeks later, he was already guilty in the eyes of public opinion. So he went from hero to zero in the public eye frightfully quickly.
Why do you think that happened? I mean, and what does that leave in terms of room for salvation and redemption in the public eye?
Well, I don't think it leaves much room at all. People today still believe that Oscar got off terribly lightly, even though he has lost everything in terms of his career, even though he's going to spend the next 4 years with his liberty completely removed. Whether he's in jail or whether he's doing a correctional supervision, he's not a free man and won't be for the next 5 years. There is no parole. He comes out after 10 months. He spends the next 4 years and 2 months under correctional supervision with no parole. But South Africans still believe that he got off lightly. South Africans believe that he is a murderer. The vast majority is what I'm saying here, that he is a murderer, and that is why they cannot believe he got such a light sentence. In fact, the judge found he was not a murderer, and that he is somebody, a young man who made a negligent but terrible, fatal error.
Jean-Jacques, thank you very much. Jean-Jacques Cornish. Well, as we heard so many times during the trial, the truth of what exactly happened that night is known by only 2 people, one of whom is dead. And we're going to take a look back now at some of the unanswered questions left by this whole trial.
It's a case which turned everyone into an armchair detective. The theories, speculation and hype swirled around from the early hours of Valentine's Day last year, when the news broke of the shooting. Many hoped the court case would finally resolve what happened that night. Despite the trial running over 6 months, some aspects still remain a mystery. Unanswered questions following the trial include: why did it take 11 days for the police to get hold of Oscar Pistorius' mobile phone, the one he used on the night Reeves Steenkamp was killed? And why did his phone connect to the internet an hour and a half before the killing? Was it being used, or was it simply an automated connection which had activated by itself? The judge herself conceded there are a number of aspects which don't make sense, including why didn't Pistorius check where his girlfriend was when he heard a noise coming from the bathroom, and why, Judge Masipa adds, did Riva Steenkamp not call out to Pistorius when she was just meters away from him behind the toilet door.
Well, with me is Eyewitness News reporter Barry Bateman, who's also written a book on the whole case, Behind the Door. Barry, what for you are the unanswered questions still left hanging?
Well, I think perhaps where we should start is, and it started at the bail application, known as the improbabilities raised by Magistrate Desmond Nair. They were also called the peculiarities, which were raised by Judge Thokozile Masipa. And this relates to Oscar Pistorius' conduct in the bedroom when he heard that noise. It was debated in public opinion, or in the public sphere. First thing you do, you hear a noise at that time of the night, you ask your partner, but did you hear that? You need that confirmation. That was something for Thokozile Masipa she found was unusual, didn't ask that question. The others related to Oscar Pistorius. He went down to the bathroom screaming, shouting, ultimately being in the bathroom just a few arms lengths away from Riva Steenkamp. Why did she never call out to him? All the other things, the other options that he could have done that particular morning, why didn't he do them? Call the security instead of fetching his firearm and going and shooting his girlfriend.
Was there a sense of disappointment that the trial did not answer the questions perhaps it was expected rather to answer?
Well, I think it's two people, and you said it a few minutes ago, two people went into this house, one person came out alive. There's always going to be a lingering mystery surrounding this particular case. Perhaps some of the unanswered questions that people had hoped would provide some explanation, or, we need the solid proof of what happened there. This related to the cell phone, for example. We know that this one of them, Oscar had two cell phones at his house. He had his work phone and his personal phone. We know that the personal phone was removed from the crime scene. It was returned to the police nearly 2 weeks later. Ultimately went on a journey all the way to the United States, to Apple headquarters, to be analyzed because the police couldn't access it. Eventually coming back, the police suspected that some data had been deleted from it. But when it came to the trial, nothing was led from this particular phone. All those WhatsApp messages that you saw that Karin was referring to, all of that came from Riva's phone. There wasn't a single piece of evidence led from Oscar Pistorius' phone.
Barry, I know you've been very involved in social media. We're just going to turn to the social media aspect of this trial, because it has been a trial that has absolutely gripped social media. Just going to take you through a bit of an example of some of the reaction that's been coming in. A flurry of tweets circulating the Twitter sphere all day, and maybe we can take you through some. The hashtags Oscar Pistorius, Oscar trial, Riva and Masipa have been trending. The main topic has been the length of the sentence handed down. Lele Jenkins in South Africa says 5 years only. This judge has disappointed me far more than I ever thought possible. He's free and Riva's dead. Peter Shepherd tweets 5 years for Oscar Pistorius, Riva Steenkamp's family to suffer for the rest of their lives. There also have been messages of support for Oscar Pistorius, and let's just bring you one from the Support for Oscar page on Facebook. They say, standing with you and your family, Oscar, today and forever. Barry, you have been very active on social media. Is there a prevailing sense of reaction, negative or positive, about the length of this sentence?
Well, I've always found generally South African society has been quite polarized on the case of Oscar Pistorius. Everyone's emotionally invested in this. Everyone's got an opinion. On the sentence, I think there's one part of the opinion is that at the very least Oscar Pistorius is going to see the inside of a jail cell when they hear the 5 years. But once they get to, in terms of the legislation and the way it's being applied in terms of the sentence, Oscar Pistorius will probably only serve anything between 8 to 10 months. And then there is that backlash that they feel somehow they're disappointed. But I think we should be taking our cue perhaps from the Steenkamp family. I think it was Barry and June, they issued a statement today saying that they are satisfied. They believe that justice has been served. We should also perhaps look at Oscar Pistorius. He's not going to be appealing the sentence. He's going to accept it. He's going to serve his term in jail. Where there is still questions about whether justice is served is perhaps where the state is at the moment, and there is still the prospect of them appealing the culpable homicide murder conviction. There's still a scope there, we understand, for an argument in terms of the way the law was applied in her coming to the decision. So I think in terms, how is South Africa feeling about this? It's still mixed. There's still people who believe Oscar Pistorius is a murderer and he's got away with murder. But of course there is that side that he has been given a jail term, and that will suffice.
Finally, Barry, this was a landmark trial because it was televised. You're a crime reporter. Well, how has it changed the perspective of what justice is like in South Africa?
Well, I think certainly our work is under more scrutiny. It's not just our filter of our knowledge that has been going through into our work. For perhaps a newspaper journalist, we go through them, it gets filtered before it gets written. It gets filtered by us before it gets out onto the airwaves as a radio journalist. But here we have South Africans, anybody who can access a courtroom, they can gather, they can listen to a full proceedings. I think it's perhaps made us, it's assisted South Africans in understanding perhaps the legal processes, and maybe assisted us in making it a bit easier to tell the story from inside a courtroom, because we're dealing with a population or news consumers who are aware of what's actually happening inside the courtroom.
Barry Bateman, thank you very much from Eyewitness News. So after 7.5 months of this trial, Oscar Pistorius now settling into his cell for a night behind bars for the first time since his conviction for culpable homicide. From me, Karin, Giannone, and all of the team here in Pretoria, goodbye for now.